Here on our channel, people's stories come to life. Stories from different eras, professions, and destinies. Each of them follows their own path, their own life woven from circumstances, challenges, and choices. Before we step into their world, make sure to subscribe, and later, share your impressions in the comments. Now, let's begin. Some stories don't start with loud events. They start small, with details, with moments that seem insignificant, yet hold entire worlds within them. These are stories about people who never chose to be heroes. They simply lived, worked, made mistakes, learned from them, and kept moving forward. The lives of such people unfold like a slowly blooming flower, each petal revealing itself in its own time, each layer hiding new secrets, new pains, new joys. This is a story from a time when the world was just a little different. The hills of Piedmont breathe differently in spring. The air carries the scent of plowed soil, raw milk, and distant rain. Somewhere between the chestnut groves and the cobbled road to the village, a child learned to listen to silence. Not the silence of stillness, but that of hidden motion beneath the ground. Worms, roots, and damp mushrooms, busy with life no one ever sees. Her mother said that if one placed an ear to the soil, one could hear the world remembering itself. The girl tried once. She pressed her cheek against the earth, feeling its breath like a slow heartbeat. It made her laugh, though she did not know why. The earth seemed a living thing, shy and powerful. Perhaps it was her first teacher. In those days, their cottage stood at the end of a narrow lane, with its roof patched by straw and clay that leaked when the clouds grew heavy. The father worked on nearby estates, mending fences and driving oxen through rain-swollen fields. He came home rarely, tired, smelling of mud and bitterness. The mother sold goat cheese and dried herbs at the market in Monforte, her hands red from the chill water of morning chores. They spoke little. Words cost energy best saved for labor. The girl cared for the hens, carried wood from the coppice, and gathered mushrooms after rain. She had a good nose, the neighbors said, and could spot a boletus from across a ditch. Sometimes she wandered farther, under the broad leaves where golden light struggled to touch the ground, bringing home baskets full of little treasures to dry above the stove. She learned the difference between edible and deathly by touch and smell, not by reason. Her life, like those mushrooms, clung to the secret places of the world, modest, hidden, freely given by the earth. Once a month, a friar from Alba visited the village. He told stories of saints, miracles, and heavenly justice to children gathered under the fig tree. To her, his voice sounded strange, not holy, but heavy with longing. She remembered one story about a saint who could make water rise from stone. People had doubted him until a spring burst under his bare feet. That night, lying on a straw mattress, she dreamed of digging her hands into the ground to release something bright and pure. Since then, every time she knelt to pluck a mushroom, she wondered whether the earth had another secret to show. Life turned with the seasons. Hard frost came early that year. Her mother burned bark when the woodpile ran short. They made soups of chestnuts and bitter greens. Hunger taught patience, and patience taught silence. There was no complaint, only the slow endurance known to those who have little and yet manage to live by the rhythm of the land. One winter night, her father returned with a bruised face and a new rumor.
A noble family had purchased nearby fields and would need laborers at low wages.
He grumbled about lords with silver boots and wooden hearts. She watched his anger cool into weariness as he nursed a chipped mug of wine, staring at the fire's reflection like it might answer for all injustices. It did not, of course. The flames only whispered of tomorrow's chores. When spring returned, the girl followed her mother to the market. The street smelled of bread ovens, tallow candles, and horse sweat. Women traded gossip as easily as coins. She listened more than she spoke, learning how smiles could hide sharpness, how a lowered voice could carry meaning. One merchant, a plump woman with lace at her sleeves, told her mother that truffles, those black, fragrant knots found under certain oaks, could make a fortune for anyone lucky enough to find them. The girl asked what a truffle looked like. The woman laughed, saying it looked like a lump of dirt until it turned into gold in someone else's hands. That evening, as crickets began their long conversation, she wandered behind the house with the family's thin, curious pig trotting after her. The animal rooted near the oak with its pale snout, and the girl crouched beside it, sniffing the damp soil. The scent was strange, earthy, sweet, deep. She thought of the merchant's story. That night she told her mother she wanted to learn to search for things buried beneath the leaves. The mother smiled faintly. If the land wants to feed you, it'll show you how. Years moved unnoticed, like clouds slatting across a constant sky. The girl grew taller, her laugh less frequent, but her eyes steadier. She watched the world change. Taxes rose, soldiers passed through seeking recruits, and rumors of unrest drifted from the cities. None of that reached her cottage except in whispers. For her, the world remained bounded by the slope of the hills and the murmur of the woods. Yet something within her sharpened, a curiosity, not of rebellion, but of truth. She once found a silver button in the roots of a beech tree. It shone faintly, even after years under damp earth. It seemed important, though she did not know why. Objects like these felt alive to her. They carried stories of those who had once touched them, stories the soil did not forget. She wrapped the button in cloth and kept it under her pillow, a quiet token from the invisible world beneath her feet. In summer, her father fell ill and did not return from the estate. The priest came to their door at dusk, hat in hand, speaking gently of confession and peace. Her mother listened, then went back to kneading curds as though she had expected it all along. Grief arrived silently, like fine dust settling on everything. The girl kept going to the woods, now out of habit. She spoke less. Her mother began to cough through the nights, and within a year the cottage roof leaned emptier over a single figure. Grief is a kind of schooling. It teaches one where to stand in silence, when to listen for footsteps that no longer come. From morning to dusk, she learned the routine of solitude, lighting the stove, fetching water, baking her bread. Sometimes, while washing linen at the stream, she caught her reflection trembling in the ripples and thought she looked older than her years. But there was resignation in her calmness, and a peculiar strength in the way she carried her basket home without hurry. The villagers noticed she managed alone and began to trust her with small tasks, delivering herbs to the local healer, collecting chestnuts for an old baker, even searching for truffles at modest prices. Her skill was admired, though some whispered she had a strange sense for finding things better left hidden. She took no pride nor shame in what they said. She merely worked, saving what little she could. One autumn, a storm ripped through the valley, scattering branches and flooding paths. When the rain stopped, she went into the forest and found the earth overturned, roots bare, mushrooms drowned. Yet there, under a fallen oak, the air carried a scent she had never met before. She knelt and brushed aside the mud, uncovering not fungus, but a lump of black clay shaped like a half-moon. As she turned it in her hand, she thought she smelled the breath of life itself. The land, she reasoned, always remembers how to begin again. By the time the first snow gleamed on the fields, the girl had begun to understand that life was a conversation between patience and discovery. She owned almost nothing: a roof, a piglet, a few baskets, and a talent for noticing the invisible. But her eyes held curiosity like a candle that neither wind nor night could snuff. The hills slept under frost, the chimneys whispered smoke into gray sky, and the girl, now almost grown, looked from her doorway toward the dark line of woods. Beyond those trees lay the world's secrets, and, though she did not yet know it, her own. Morning spread softly across the hills, dim blue deepening into gold. The air smells of wet soil and crushed leaves. A single cottage stands between vineyards and hazelwoods, small and smoke-crowned, tended by a woman who greets the day without words. She has grown from the quiet child of the valley into the kind of person the land itself seems to shape: spare, patient, hard-handed, self-possessed. Work wakes with her. She ties her kerchief, lifts the latch, and lets a pig trot out ahead. Its bristles glisten with dew, its small eyes bright with purpose. The animal's name is Brina, faithful and moody, with the stubbornness of one who knows she is useful. Woman and pig descend the slope together, weaving toward the truffle grounds. The rhythm of their steps matches the cadence of mule bells far away. Days now follow a measured order. The woman sells her finds to merchants, traveling between Alba and Turin. The trade sustains her modestly: a few silver coins, a little oil, some wine for winter, patches for old skirts. She lives alone, eats sparingly, and keeps her things arranged with calm precision, the habits of someone who must be her own steward. When she looks upon her garden, she sees both sufficiency and hunger, the paradox of rural life. At the market, people call her the pig woman from Tannerow Hill. Some say it kindly, others with amusement. She does not mind. What they call her is less important than what they pay. She exchanges her truffles by weight, eyes the scales, and smiles when merchants try to cheat her, the kind of smile that confuses pride with politeness. One long-nosed trader once told her, "You have the look of someone who expects miracles from mud." She answered only with the flick of her shawl, half amusement, half fatigue. Humor for her is not luxury, it is survival. Each morning, she walks where light filters through oak branches, watching how mist rolls along the roots like smoke. She hears the forest's breath, the rustle of hedgehogs, the click of a deer hoof, the soft snort of Brina digging. Every scent holds a hint of promise. She bends close when the pig signals, brushing away leaves to find treasure, a dark, knotted jewel, smooth to the touch, holding in it an entire season's worth of sun, transformed by roots. Sometimes she speaks to Brina, softly. "Good girl," she murmurs once, the only words of the morning. The pig grunts, satisfied more by the reward than the praise. A partnership of instinct and trust, unspoken yet complete. In town, she meets Matteo, another forager, younger by a few years, broad-shouldered, always smiling as if to bargain with misfortune itself. They share meals when paths cross, bread, goat cheese, perhaps a jug of rough red wine. Matteo dreams of working for the estates, where truffles fetch higher prices, and nobles dine by candlelight. She listens to him talk, amused by his confidence. Something about his cheer unsettles her, as if he carries too little caution for the world they live in. Yet she likes his company, though she never says so. He helps carry her baskets at times, pretends he does it out of gallantry, and she pretends to believe him. Beneath this easy pretense lies a cordial understanding. Two small lives moving side by side through the forest, aware that companionship is a rare luxury in a poor land. Work fills most of her mind, but solitude leaves room for thought. In the hush of midday, while digging near the roots of an elm, she studies how the roots wind and twist upon themselves like a map of choices. She wonders if people are made in the same way, each decision a branching path, all buried in the same soil of circumstance. Years ago, she might have prayed to understand it. Now she simply observes. Faith, like truffles, is found by patience, not by pleading. At home, evening falls early. Smoke gives way to the scent of chestnut stew and the crackle of a small fire. She washes her hands, roughened by work, and finds pleasure in the clean sting of cool water. The walls of her cottage hold quiet company. A stool, a single candle, the wooden rosary that once belonged to her mother. She keeps everything as it was, except that she no longer speaks prayers aloud. Silence, to her, feels truer than recitation. Winter approaches, the air sharpens, markets grow livelier with gossip than trade. Merchants whisper of royal taxes, grain shortages, and unrest in the cities. The noise of distant matters seems to tremble at the edge of her life, never entering it fully. Yet sometimes, when smoke from her chimney drifts eastward toward the great road of Turin, she imagines the world beyond, filled with courts, marble, and strangers who never touch the earth with bare hands. She feels no envy for them, only curiosity. One morning, a rider from the local estate halts near her gate. The horse snorts impatiently. The rider, in a dark coat gleaming with damp, introduces himself as a steward of the Count Raguzzi. His tone is polite, yet somehow dismissive. He says the manor requires truffles for the upcoming feast. The request sounds like an order wrapped in courtesy. She nods, agreeing to deliver her best within the week. When he leaves, the sound of hooves lingers like a cold echo. The woods become her refuge again. She moves quietly between the trees, attentive, as though listening for something beyond scent, the breathing of the earth itself. When she rests, she breaks bread and leans against an oak trunk, watching small rivers of light move through leaves. Her thoughts drift toward her mother's saying, that the earth gives to those who listen without impatience. Matteo meets her there sometimes, eager to talk about new buyers or clever tricks to train pigs faster. He boasts of secret spots rich with truffles, gestures broadly with his hands, and laughs at her caution. She counters with modest irony, reminding him that the forest keeps its own counsel. He laughs again, promising that one day he will make both their fortunes. The idea makes her smile. She trusts him in a simple way, untested yet soothing. The week of the feast arrives with fog thick as milk. She trudges up to the manor, her basket heavy, Brina snorting proudly at her side. The gates rise before her like black ribs. Servants swarm about, preparing garlands and roasting meats. The steward meets her under the arch, inspecting the truffles with cold precision, before counting coins into her palm. His fingers brush hers without gentleness. She withdraws her hand, uneasy but outwardly calm. Power, she reminds herself, always hides behind manners. On her way back, she passes peasants gathering firewood, their laughter muted by fatigue. An old woman greets her, warning of wolves said to prowl near the ridge. Superstition runs stronger than faith in these parts. Wolves are blamed when things go missing, ghosts when cows fall ill. She knows better. Hunger explains both. Still, she quickens her pace as night descends, clutching her lantern tightly. By the hearth, she counts her earnings, imagines briefly what they might buy, a new blanket, stronger boots, oil enough for months. But instead of joy, a strange emptiness settles in her chest. Work has become habit, and habit leaves little space for wonder. She looks at Brina sleeping by the door, dreams flickering in the animal's twitching limbs, and feels grateful that something still lives by instinct alone, untouched by reflection. Later that winter, Matteo returns from the city with stories of nobles and deals, of coins passed in secret and promises made under candlelight. He seems older, restless, dressed in a jacket finer than before. He tells her the steward at Ragusi's manor trades stolen truffles for silver and smuggler's wine. She listens quietly, stirring her stew. "Everyone steals something," he laughs. "Some take gold, some take time." The words linger after he leaves. She wonders what she herself has taken from life. Perhaps her share of silence, a few hours of peace denied to others. Stepping outside, she watches the valley shine faintly under moonlight, frost tracing pale veins across the ground. Brina snuffles at her feet, scent-drunk, nosing at the soil as though even now something valuable waited below. The woman crouches beside her, brushing away frost until her fingertips find the cool firmness of the earth. She smiles faintly. Nothing reveals itself this time, not even the smell of fungus. Still, she senses that the forest, like fortune, holds more secrets than she has yet uncovered. Some days it gives only food, others, perhaps, a sign. Tonight, it offers only patience. Inside the fire hums and cracks. She warms her hands and watches the flame split and fold, thinking how it resembles the pattern of her days, bright for a moment, then quieter, steady. The rhythm of survival endures. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the dogs of the lords bark toward the silent woods. She kneels to stroke Brina's ear, whispering something soft, half promise, half prayer to the sleeping beast. Tomorrow will come, with rain or with truffles, with laughter or loss. For now, warmth is enough, and the world holds still. The embers pulse gently, as if breathing, and the huntress rests, waiting, though for what she cannot yet name. Autumn came early that year, dressing the hills in bronze and smoke. The air thickened with the scent of wet leaves and ripe grapes left behind after harvest. The vineyards hummed faintly with flies, and the forest floor glowed with damp moss, as if the earth itself were exhaling before sleep. The woman, now well into the steadiness of her years, felt the seasons settle in her bones. She had seen many autumns, each the same in color yet different in weight. The work continued as before, though her steps had grown measured, less haste, more listening. Bryna, rounder and slower, still rooted the earth with practiced devotion. Together they moved through the oaks after rain, when the soil was soft enough for surrender. There was peace in repetition, that sweet illusion that tomorrow will resemble today. But the forest had its own timing. One morning, after a night of thunder that left the trees trembling with drizzle, she led Bryna along a slope she rarely visited. The path curved upward, strewn with stones and wild thyme. The pig's snout quivered until it caught a scent, sharper than fungus, with something metallic beneath. Bryna snorted, dug furiously, throwing mud across her shoes. The woman stooped to steady her, brushing aside roots, and froze. Half buried in the clay lay a small silver locket, its chain knotted, its surface dulled by time. She turned it in her palm. Beneath the dirt, a faint pattern, 2 letters entwined, L and C. It was cold, heavier than its size promised, as if packed with memory. She wiped it with her sleeve and caught the ghost of perfume, impossible after so many years. The air around her felt suddenly thinner. There was no truffle that morning, yet her basket felt full. Objects found by accident belonged to the finder, or so villagers said, though some murmured such luck was mixed with danger. She wrapped the locket in cloth and placed it deep in her pocket. Bryna grunted softly, impatient for her usual reward. They turned homeward as the day dimmed to gray. At her cottage, she rinsed the locket in a bowl of rainwater. A hinge resisted, then gave way with a quiet click, revealing a painted miniature. A young woman in pale dress, her gaze lifted slightly, as if surprised mid-thought. A lock of brown hair coiled beside the painting. Such delicacy did not belong to her world. The woman stared at it beneath candlelight, feeling the distance between silver and soil. Later, at the market, she carried the locket in her shawl, unable to forget its touch. She mentioned it in passing to Matteo, who laughed in disbelief. "You and your pig find treasures now," he said, shaking his head. But his laughter had nerves behind it. He pulled her aside, lowering his voice. "Keep it quiet. That crest, it might belong to the Contessa of Raguzzi." "Didn't you hear the old story?" She had not, so he told it. A noble woman who vanished years ago, accused of stealing jewels, though some said she had been betrayed by her own kin. Only a locket was ever missing. The woman listened, but Matteo's grin unsettled her. He advised selling it to a traveling jeweler before questions arose. She didn't answer. That night, she hid the locket under a loose floorboard, uneasy though no one had seen her do it. The following days her routine stuttered. She still went truffling, but the forest had lost its simple joy. Each hollow tree seemed to watch her. Each crow's call sounded like a warning. She wondered how long the locket had slept underground. 10 years, perhaps 20? Had the woman in the portrait truly fled, or had something darker happened beneath these same trees? When she walked through the village, bits of gossip brushed against her like falling leaves. People mentioned the Raguzzi estate. in lowered tones. Debts, illness, servants dismissed. Someone claimed the late Contessa's ghost visited the grounds on stormy nights, searching for what was lost. Superstition reawakened like an old tune. She found herself listening too often, though she knew better. Still, knowledge has its own gravity. She told herself it was none of her concern. Yet when she truffled near the manor's border, curiosity pulled her gaze toward its shuttered windows. Once she saw a curtain shift, and the faint outline of a face, too pale, too still. She looked away quickly. The next market day, Matteo was not there. A merchant said he'd gone to the river town on errands for the steward. She shrugged, pretending not to care. Still, something tightened around her thoughts. That evening she dreamed of digging again, but this time Brina uncovered not truffles, nor silver, but a human hand, pale as ash, the locket resting on its palm. She woke before dawn, her heart hammering against the quiet. To settle her unease, she worked twice as hard. The harvest passed, the forest turned bare, its breath sharper each day. Once, while resting, she met an old woman gathering firewood, who nodded toward her basket and asked if she still walked the Raguzzi woods alone. The question carried more than curiosity. She replied vaguely, but the crone's eyes glimmered as she said, "Some things under those oaks were buried by grace, and some by shame. Best not mix the two." The days shortened. Rain returned, bringing the dull ache of winter. Occasionally, she took the locket out and polished it with a scrap of linen. The painted woman's face grew clearer, expression gentler, almost alive. Its presence changed the air of her cottage, like having a guest who never spoke but never left. Once, when Matteo finally reappeared, he noticed her guardedness. "You've been quiet," he said. "Don't tell me you're still keeping that trinket." His tone tried to stay light but failed. She did not answer. The pause between them stretched thin. Trust, once loose and easy as laughter, had become measured and brittle. He shifted his weight, muttered a farewell, and walked off toward the tavern. That night she dreamed again of the forest. Rain fell through the trees like beads of silver, turning the path into mirrors. The locket opened by itself, the portrait fading until only the initials remained, gleaming faintly. Somewhere, distant thunder rolled, not anger, but remembrance. She woke with a decision forming without words. The locket, she thought, should not stay buried again. Yet neither should it be sold to strangers. Perhaps it needed returning, to whom or where she did not yet know. For days she walked restless routes, her thoughts tracing every rumor she had heard: the vanished lady, the estate's decline, the steward's cold gaze. Though she had never meddled in another's story, she sensed one had chosen her. Truth, once glimpsed, holds fast like a bramble snagging at the hem. Late in autumn, frost glassed the fields. She followed Brina back to the very slope of the first discovery, the same oak crouched under fog. Kneeling there, she placed her hand on the soil, half expecting warmth from within. The forest was still. Only the drip of water from leaves disturbed the quiet. "Tell me what you want," she whispered, unsure to whom the words belonged. There was no reply, only the faint rustle of the earth settling beneath her. She rose slowly, brushing mud from her palms. The locket, safe in her pocket, felt heavier now, as if it carried not metal, but a promise awaiting its keeper. By dusk, mist veiled the hills, and the road home looked unfamiliar. The woman walked it anyway, guided more by habit than sight, her thoughts tangled between fear and resolve. Whatever the truth behind the silver token, she knew it had reached her hands because the soil, in its wisdom, decided the time for silence was ending. The candle trembled on her table that night, throwing long shadows over the floorboards. She placed the locket beside it, watching light ripple across its surface. Outside, wind pressed against the shutters with the low murmur of distant voices. Brina stirred, restless, then settled again. The woman listened to the storm gathering over the valley. Somewhere within its whispering, half wind, half memory, something called her name. Rain had not stopped for 3 days. It drummed steadily over roofs, pooled in ruts along the road, and turned the lowlands into mirrors of dull silver. The air smelled of iron and wet straw. Beneath this gray veil, the woman moved quietly, her shawl drawn close, the basket heavy upon her arm. Brina trotted after her, snorting at puddles, indifferent to weather or mood. The forest waited, sodden but alive. Life went on, though something had shifted. Since finding the locket, silence had grown denser around her. Even her laughter, when it came, felt rehearsed. She worked as always, but her thoughts diverged like branching roots toward forbidden ground. Mateo avoided her now, pleading errands at distant estates. She did not chase him. Distance between people, she had learned, is a kind of weather, too. One can live through it by changing one's coat. When the fields dried, messengers from the Raguzzi manor passed through town. They purchased figs, candles, and wool, leaving gossip wherever they stopped. Servants whispered that illness had taken the old count's strength, and that his steward ran the house with a hard hand. One voice dared to repeat that the manor had debts and shadows too heavy for its walls. Another mentioned a name long erased from ledgers, Contessa Lucia, once beloved, then accused, then gone. The woman listened in silence while mending her nets for truffle scent. Each mention of the Contessa pressed like a finger upon the bruise she carried in her conscience. She had hidden the locket by candlelight again, this time beneath the hearthstones, telling herself she sought caution, not fear. As trade revived after the rain, she resumed her rounds, bringing truffles to merchants and healers alike. It was near the end of market day when a man stopped her by the fountain, broad shoulders, coarse scarf, the look of someone carrying secrets. He introduced himself as Pietro, once a servant in the Raguzzi household. He had heard she found something curious in the woods. How he learned this, she could not guess. His eyes were kind but restless, darting toward passers-by. "If ever you wish to know the truth of what you carry," he murmured, "the old gardener at the manor remembers more than scripture." That night she walked home along the riverbank under a bruised sky. The basket felt strangely light in her arm. Each step echoed the same thoughts. Truth offered itself like a doorway, but never without a cost. Her mother's voice haunted her, "Don't dig more than you can cover." Still, she dreamt of oak roots alive with whispers, of faces half seen beneath the soil. The sun returned after weeks of gloom. The land smelled newly washed. By instinct, more than resolve, she took the path leading toward the manor. Brina slowed as they crossed its outer fields, perhaps sensing what her mistress did not admit. The estate emerged through mist, proud yet weary.
Its walls were the color of old bone, the windows shuttered like closed eyes. A fountain stood dry, its angel missing a hand. A servant at the gate frowned, but let her in when she mentioned truffles. The steward would not see her. Instead, a younger maid received the basket and vanished down a corridor scented with mildew and candle wax. While waiting, the woman studied the courtyard. A cracked urn, moss climbing the steps, silence heavy as church air.
Then, an elderly man emerged from a side door, bent, bearded, carrying pruning shears. His eyes, pale green, fixed on her with quiet wonder. "You bring the forest on your shoes," he said softly. She greeted him, unsure whether courtesy or caution would serve better. Pietro's words returned to mind. Gathering courage, she mentioned the vanished Contessa and asked whether the old gardener had known her. He hesitated, then motioned her into the shelter of an archway. "The lady loved walking these grounds," he said at last, "took pity on the servants. She planted a white rose by the chapel wall, said it would bloom even in grief. Then one winter she was gone. The steward told us not to speak of her, not ever, said she stole silver and fled to Turin. But I saw her the night she vanished, near the oak ridge. She was not running away. She was following someone." The woman's breath stilled. She wanted to ask whom, but footsteps sounded down the hall. The gardener slipped away among the vines before she could thank him. The maid returned with her basket empty, payment already counted. There was no kindness in her eyes, only curiosity. "The steward wonders why your truffles always come from near our woods," she said lightly. Tone sharpened beneath the sweetness. "Be careful not to trespass." Outside sunlight had dimmed, though the hour was early. Brina pulled at her leash, eager to leave. The road back seemed longer than before. That evening she sat by the stove, turning the steward's warning over in her mind. Her world of soil and scent had widened into something uncertain, edged with invisible dangers. Weeks passed with uneasy quiet. Matteo returned briefly, offering no apology but a forced smile. They met by the mill stream, exchanged half-hearted pleasantries. She studied him closely, the nervous tapping of his fingers, the gleam of sweat around his collar, though the air was cool. When she mentioned the Raguzzi estate, his smile faltered. He swore he had no connection to them, yet a small cut on his wrist looked fresh, as if rope had burned him. Their conversation ended there. That winter brought early snows, soft but relentless. Her roof held, though the door warped in the damp. Brina fell sick, a swelling in the joints, slow but cruel. The animal still managed short walks, guided more by loyalty than appetite. The woman cared for her as she would kin, rubbing oil into her hide, speaking to her though there was little hope of reply. In the stillness of those days, memory took over. Images of the portrait in the locket returned with unnerving clarity. The painted woman's eyes seemed to ask for witness, not pity. When the snow thawed, she sought the chapel mentioned by the gardener. Beyond the weeds, near the crumbling stone wall, something pale indeed bloomed. A rose bush, sparse but defiant. Its thorns gleamed with dew, its scent faint as breath. She touched one petal and felt an odd relief, as though the land itself had confirmed the story's truth. But her moment of stillness broke at once. Someone was watching. The steward stood under a yew tree, cane in hand, eyes like polished slate. He greeted her with formal coldness. "We appreciate your service. though perhaps your curiosity reaches too far." His words carried the weight of menace disguised as advice. She bowed slightly, murmured something about prayer, and departed. Behind her, his voice called, "Some things buried are best left in mercy's hands." She walked until the hills hid the manor from view. The path seemed steeper, the ground heavier. Each heartbeat repeated the echo of his warning, yet his threat only deepened her resolve. Truth, she thought, does not die when silenced. It sleeps, waiting for someone foolish enough to wake it. That night she knelt by the hearth, lifted the stone, and unlocked the locket again. Candlelight rippled across its face. Lucia Contessa, if that was her name, looked back unchanged. The woman thought of the rose bush blooming alone under gray sky, and felt their lives intertwined, two forms of endurance beneath different kinds of weather. Brina stirred at her feet, weak but breathing. The wind pressed against the shutters, making them tremble like a warning, but not quite closing. Inside, warmth held a fragile peace. Yet her gaze remained on the silver oval, reflecting a faint shimmer of firelight. It no longer felt like a secret treasure. It had become a key, one whose lock she had already begun, unwillingly, to turn. The frost melted with reluctance that spring, leaving behind a land both wounded and reborn. Paths, once hidden beneath snow, glimmered with mud, and the woods drew breath again, damp and raw. From her doorway the woman watched smoke twist against a pale sky, its pattern brittle and uncertain, as though even the air hesitated to begin anew. Brina no longer greeted the mornings. The pig rested near the hearth, slower now, her appetite fading. The woman prepared herbal poultices and spoke softly to her as to an old friend. Grief, she had learned, is a patient guest. It takes what space is offered and waits for silence to deepen. Trade with the manor continued. The steward's letters arrived through messengers who wore gloves even in warmth. All their words were balanced between politeness and threat, requesting deliveries with an edge of warning. The woman fulfilled them, though her feet dragged heavier each time she crossed the fields. Among the villagers, such errands stirred quiet fascination. Some called her bold, others foolish. A few said cursed. She ignored them all. A roof depends on coin, not approval. Still, nights grew uneasy. Once, she thought she heard scratching at her shutters, but found only branches shivering in the wind. Another time, returning from market, she saw footprints circling the cottage, large, deliberate, neither her own nor any she recognized. In the soil near the door, a crushed acorn glimmered with wax, as if it had been sealed and broken open. She gathered it, uncertain whether to laugh at her imagination or fear it. Matteo came at dusk a week later. His face gleamed with the shine of watered wine. The smell of yeast and anxiety arrived before his words. "You've got yourself talked about," he said, leaning against her doorframe, avoiding her gaze. "They say you wander too close to secrets. The steward has questions about what you found in the woods." She kept her tone even. "You told him?" He looked offended, then ashamed, then weary. "Not directly. I might have spoken before thinking. It slipped. I thought it harmless." The room expanded in the silence that followed. She watched the candlelight flicker over his hands as he fumbled with his cap. "You should stay away from the manor," he went on, voice low. "They won't let you ask questions. They keep their own accounts of the dead." Her anger arrived without sound, cold rather than fierce. Betrayal never feels loud at first.
It is a thinning of air, a shift of light, an absence one hears more than sees. "Go home," she said quietly. He lingered, as if waiting for forgiveness that would not come. When the door closed behind him, she felt neither safer nor more alone, only older. 2 days later, the steward came in person. His horse's hooves clattered against the stones, scattering chickens and silence alike. He entered without waiting to be invited, eyes sweeping the small room with disdain that could have been mistaken for curiosity. "We've been told you keep something that is not yours," he began, his voice smooth as oil spilled on water. She met his gaze. "I keep only what I find. The forest decides what it gives." He smiled thinly. "The forest, like the poor, often forgets its obligations." He tapped his gloved fingers against the table. "If you find truffles, you sell them. If you find silver with a noble crest, you return it. Unless you wish suspicion to take root in your garden." Her heart pulsed once in high alarm, though her tone stayed calm. She nodded, neither yielding nor denying. He left after counting her truffles and paying without gratitude. His shadow lingered long after his boots had gone. That night she lifted the hearthstone where the locket lay, touched it only long enough to feel its chill, and understood it no longer belonged underground. Secrets, when buried too deep, begin to shift the soil above them. Spring deepened. Work continued by necessity. She resumed wandering the woods at dawn. Yet the forest seemed altered, uneasy, as if holding back its breath. Each rustle of leaves startled her. Each scent recalled something lost. She prayed without words that Brina might recover, though the pig now remained behind, lying near the door as if guarding what remained of their quiet life. During one of her hunts, she came upon Pietro, the old servant who had once whispered truth in the manor courtyard. His beard had turned completely white, his eyes rheumy but sharp. He greeted her as kin. "You should not stand too near their walls," he warned, pointing toward the manor's direction. "The steward remembers everything ugly, even when others forget." She asked, "Why is he frightened of a dead woman's memory?" Pietro sighed. "Because some debts walk beside the living until confessed. The Contessa's disgrace was his salvation. A man hides many sins beneath another's name." He glanced over his shoulder, lowering his voice. "If the truth ever surfaced, the Raguzzi house would crumble faster than that rose bush she planted." His words wounded her more than they scared her. Truth became now a matter of balance, a burden growing too heavy for one pair of hands. When she thanked him, he merely crossed himself and vanished into the pathless trees. Summer came, thick with insects and uncertainty. The gossip of her supposed disobedience followed her like a stray dog. In the market, conversations ended when she approached. Coins were counted twice before landing in her palm. Matteo tried once more to speak with her, but she turned away, unwilling to share even words. Trust spends quickly and cannot be remade by apology. One evening she returned from the hills to find her door ajar. The sight froze her mid-step. Brina lay near the hearth but raised no alarm. Inside, the coals in the stove were cold, the air disturbed. Someone had entered. Her baskets had been moved, the bedclothes turned over. Beneath the hearthstone, the hiding place gaped empty. The locket was gone. For a moment she stood as if turned to wood. Then she sank onto the stool, head in hands, the cold spreading up from her knees. There are defeats smaller than death, yet just as final, the loss of what tethered her to purpose.
Only then did she notice something else, a scrap of paper pinned beneath a pebble on the table. 3 words, written in a hand too elegant for the village. Return what is owed. That night passed in drifting half-sleep. Rain ticked at the window, an owl cried over the valley. She saw in her mind the Contessa's painted face rising out of darkness, the silver chain breaking again and again. She thought of Matteo's nervous hands, of the steward's threat, of Pietro's warning. When dawn came, she rose with dry eyes and the strength of someone who accepts the sum of her choices. She found Matteo at the tavern courtyard, weary and hungover, his jacket torn at the cuff. He started when he saw her. The confrontation required no shouting. She simply asked, "Did you take it?" His silence was answer enough. Regret flickered, but fear extinguished it quickly. "They made me," he whispered. "I didn't know they'd come for you. I swore it was only to end the talk." His voice broke on the final word. She turned and left before he could finish. To hate him would have required more energy than she had left to spend. In her chest moved only an old, tired recognition. Kindness misplaced can turn cruel without meaning to. By dusk, she locked her door, folded her shawl, and sat beside Brina. The pig's breathing rasped softly, steady but faint. Through the window she saw the clouds gather again, low and heavy, pressing the world flat. She placed her palm on Brina's back and whispered, "Rest. The earth will keep us all kindly, if not fairly." Thunder rolled somewhere far off, crossing the valley like slow judgment. She closed her eyes, and the sound of rain returned, the same rhythm that had followed her all her life. Loss had always moved beside her, just under the surface, murmuring the same promise, that everything taken finds its echo, one way or another. Outside, the night deepened, and within it something stirred, the faint scent of truffle after rain, the memory of a buried truth refusing to sleep. Summer ripened into a heavy stillness. The forest leaves drooped under their own greenness, and even the streams moved slow, burdened by warmth. The woman worked sparingly now, less by choice than exhaustion. Brina was gone. The little mound behind the cottage bore no marker, only a patch of time that grew thicker each week. For a time she avoided that spot, then stopped noticing her hesitation entirely. Loss has a way of blending into the ordinary. Coin became scarce. She traded dried mushrooms to monasteries in the nearby hills, where monks distilled liqueurs and grew patience in silence. They valued her skill, offered fair exchange, cheese, oil, warmth, but also something subtler, a respite from fear. Here, behind stone walls veined with ivy, she could breathe without watching for the steward's man. Each morning she helped in the herb garden, hands deep in soil, still cool from the night. The air smelled of sage and wet linen. The elder monk, Father Roberto, often joined her there, constant in step and manner. He spoke as one who tended not only plants but time itself. "The earth remembers kindness more than sin," he said once while pruning rue. She did not answer. Words like that, she felt, were meant to rest in silence until they ripened. In the evenings, she sat beneath the cloister arches, mending baskets for the brothers in exchange for their generosity. Candlelight flickered over frescoes faded by centuries. She studied the saints' faces, chipped and gentle, each gaze turned inward as if guarding secrets of endurance. She wondered if the missing locket, wherever it lay, had found peace or remained restless like herself. Days folded quietly, unmarked, until a cloudy afternoon when Brother Marco arrived breathless from the village. He brought a sack of millet, some news, and an old scrap of parchment he had bought from a peddler. Said it came from the Raguzzi estate when the steward's papers were sold off. "You're from that valley," he added with harmless curiosity. "Thought you'd like a look." She thanked him, more out of habit than thought, and unrolled the parchment when alone. Age had browned it, and one corner bore an imprint of a seal, partially broken but still clear enough, the same entwined letters as those on the locket. Beneath the seal, in delicate hand, a few lines of confession, more prayer than plea. "To whom finds this, know that my name was never cleared. The silver bears not my crime, but his. I leave into exile with nothing but guilt I do not own. Should truth ever breathe again, mercy must follow close behind." The name below was Lucia Contessa. The candle trembled, throwing the letters into motion. The words carried neither grandeur nor drama, only exhaustion, the kind she knew too well. She sat long after the candle burned low, staring at the nearly invisible ink, thinking how a person could vanish so completely and yet leave such fragments behind, thin as breath, yet stronger than stone. Later she sought Father Roberto, her voice quiet but urgent. "If proof of innocence were found too late," she asked, "what then can be done?" He paused, leaving his pruning aside. "Some truths seek no courtroom, daughter. They wait to be understood, not avenged." That evening, rain brushed the roof in slow rhythm. She imagined the Contessa's hand shaping those words, the quill scratching against uneven paper, the fear heavy but resolved. Justice mattered less, perhaps, than being remembered as one who tried to speak. In the weeks that followed, small changes began. Merchants spoke of shifts at the manor. The steward, failing in health, withdrew from affairs. Servants muttered about unpaid wages, possessions sold off piece by piece. She learned this from travelers passing through the monastery gate. Each bit of gossip felt like weather, distant, yet connected to the tilt of her own existence. Once, late at dusk, she walked beyond the abbey's orchard, drawn by instinct to the edge of the woods. The valley spread below her, fields paling into mist, cottages flickering with early light from hearths. She thought of Matteo somewhere down there, perhaps haunted by more than regret. She had not seen him again since that evening of confession, and she did not wish to. Their lives, intertwined by mistake, had unraveled quietly, the way weary vines withdraw from one another when winter nears. She stayed at the monastery through autumn, grateful for anonymity, though a restlessness grew, sharper with each quiet dawn. The parchment bearing Lucia's final words rested under her pillow like a promise demanding return. She knew she must carry it back, even if only to lay it where it belonged, at the place the woman had walked her last day, the oak ridge, the rose bush, the silence. When she left, the monks filled her basket with simple gifts: bread, a vial of oil, dried figs for the road. Father Roberto pressed her hand without question. "May you find peace," he said, with the gentleness of those who understand that peace often costs the rest of one's courage. She walked alone down the narrow road, the path she had feared months before. The forest greeted her like an old acquaintance, darker now, yet no longer hostile.
At dusk, she reached familiar ground, the slope where Brina once uncovered the locket. The trees had thickened, leaves glossed by evening rain. Between roots, mushrooms glowed faintly in the half-lights, their scent mild and mournful. The next morning, mist curled low over the valley. She walked along the border wall of the Ragusa estate. The manor looked hollowed, its shutters closed, though smoke drifted faintly from one chimney. Inside those walls, perhaps, the steward still breathed, clutching secrets that had long turned sour. An old woman working near the well recognized her and whispered, "He's dying. No priest will come. He raves about a woman's ghost, says she's standing at his door." The truffle huntress said nothing, only thanked her softly and continued. The large iron gates hung ajar. No servant stood watch. She stepped through, slow and steady, the parchment folded inside her bodice. The air smelled of mildew and sickness. Under the same archway where she had once waited for payment, she found Pietro again, thinner, but still upright. He greeted her with surprise that turned quickly into solemn relief.
"You heard?" he asked. She nodded. "He asks for you by name," he whispered. "Why, I do not know." She followed him inside. The halls were dark, the marble cracked. At the end of a corridor, a door half open showed the steward lying in bed, skin gray as ash, eyes fever bright. A candle burned near his hand, its flame unsteady. When she entered, he squinted as though mistaking her for another. "So," he rasped, "the earth remembers, does it?" She did not answer. She placed the parchment on the table beside him. The paper's seal caught the light. For a moment he stared, then laughed, short and bitter. "She wrote that to haunt me. My hands signed her exile, not her guilt." His coughing filled the space, dry and sharp. "I thought virtue a luxury. Gold was simpler." He reached as if to tear the parchment, but his fingers failed. His voice dropped. "Take it. Do with it what you think is mercy." His gaze flinched away from her, drifting toward some unseen corner of the room. "Tell the soil to stop whispering her name." She said only, "You could have told the truth long ago." "It was safer to live a lie than die for honesty," he muttered. A long silence followed. When she left, he was still breathing, though faintly, as if each breath must pay interest on every silence he had bought. Outside, the air felt lighter. She walked toward the chapel garden where the white rose bush still persisted, now untended. The flowers were smaller, yet their scent carried through the damp air. She knelt, buried the parchment beside the roots, and pressed the soil over with both palms. For the first time in months, she felt neither hunted nor haunted. The truth, once uncovered, had found its rest not in judgment, but in ordinary earth. The rose bush stood as witness, its thorns catching light like thin threads of fire. When twilight gathered over the valley, she lingered a moment longer, hand on the rough stone wall. From somewhere deep within the woods came the faint squeal of a wild pig, and following it, echoes of a human laugh, quick, familiar, and gone before it could be believed. The woman smiled, uncertain if it belonged to memory or the wind. Then she turned toward the path home, her steps slow but steady, carrying with her the quiet certainty that some voices live on, only when finally forgiven. Autumn returned with a quiet dignity, not as bright as in other years, but gentler, softened by mist. The hills wore their colors as if in memory rather than pride. Smoke from farm chimneys drifted low across the valley, and the earth smelled of cooling roots. Life outside continued its small habits: harvest, barter, gossip, prayer.
Yet to the woman who had walked beneath the manor's decaying roof, everything seemed quieter than before, as though even the air around her moved with caution after truth had spoken aloud. She no longer sold to the Ragusa estate. Its name was fading like ink left in rain. Rumors spread. Some said the steward had died before Christmas, alone, the housekeeper finding him still clutching a rosary that lacked its cross. Others said he confessed before the priest arrived, naming only the truffle woman as his last visitor. To her surprise, no one accused her of anything. It is often the case that when the powerful vanish, those beneath them grow suddenly polite. She spent most days in the forest again. It had taken months before she dared return to the ridges where Brina once dug, but the silence there was no longer heavy. It welcomed her as an equal. The ground bore faint marks of old roots torn by storms, and she found mushrooms sprouting where the oak split last year, bright and fragrant. She sold a few at the nearest market, enough to buy seed and oil, though her trade now seemed less about earning and more about continuing. One afternoon, while cutting through the lower grove, she felt drawn toward the old chapel behind the manor wall. The path had nearly vanished beneath fallen leaves. Through the branches, she glimpsed the roof, tilting but still intact. The rosebush she had tended grew wild now, spreading its shoots through cracks in the mortar. Where she had buried the parchment, a tender line of green sprouted between stones, as if truth itself had taken root. She sat nearby for a long time, chewing bread and gazing at the clouds. In stillness, thoughts arranged themselves. The locket was gone, the steward dead, Lucia's name half redeemed, and yet none of it felt final. There remained no grandeur to truth, only its quiet persistence. What she had uncovered did not change the world, but it changed the weight she carried within. Toward evening, she heard footsteps on the path. A man appeared, wrapped in a coarse cloak, hat in hand. Matteo. His face was thinner, his beard unkempt, but his eyes held the same uncertain brightness. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then he said softly, "I heard you were back." She watched him approach, without invitation yet without rejection. "And what do you want with that knowledge?" "I wanted to return something." From his pocket he drew a small parcel. When he placed it in her hands, the silver locket shone faintly through the wrapping. "He gave it to me before he died," Matteo said it belonged closer to the earth than to his soul. Perhaps he thought handing it through me would wash his hands cleaner. She held the cold metal without answer. Around them the last echoes of daylight drifted between trunks, slow and golden. Matteo shifted his weight. "I never meant harm," he said, voice hoarse. "Fear makes cowards before it makes villains." "Both bury the same kind of dead," she replied quietly. But her tone held no bitterness. He nodded, understanding the pardon inside the words. They stood together until the dusk turned blue, two figures shaped more by fatigue than anger. When he finally left, she felt no relief, only a small measure of peace. Later, beneath the first stars, she reopened the locket. The miniature still gleamed, though its surface had dulled with age. Lucia's painted eyes seemed even gentler, relieved of accusation. The woman traced the edge with her finger, then closed it again. This time she would not hide it. Secrets, after they have sung their song, deserve rest in light. Over the next days, she visited those who had crossed her path. Pietro, the gardener, now too frail for work. The old herb seller in the village. The children who greeted her pig years ago. To each, she gave small kindnesses, A bundle of herbs, a loaf of bread, a bit of oil from her own stores. No one saw significance in these gestures, but they carried meaning for her. Mercy often begins as small repayment for wrongs unnamed. Winter crept in softly, early but mild. She repaired her cottage roof, patched her shawl, and stacked chestnut wood by the door. Alone in her kitchen, she sometimes caught herself speaking aloud. Not prayers, not memories, just words rising unbidden into warmth. The silence around her changed shape. It no longer weighed, but embraced. One late afternoon, the forest presented her with an unexpected gift. Near the same slope where everything had begun, Bryna's favorite ground, she noticed fresh tracks, hoof marks of wild pigs, smaller than her old companions, yet sure-footed. Instinct guided her to follow. Beneath an elder oak, a mound of earth had risen slightly, soft from recent rooting. She knelt, brushed it aside, and there, almost jokingly, found a single dark truffle, round and firm, glistening like buried dusk. She laughed aloud, the sound startling even herself. The forest, it seemed, still spoke her language. She returned home that evening with the truffle resting in her palm. It would fetch little coin, but she decided to keep it, perhaps to dry and hang above the hearth as a charm. As she cooked her simple supper, the candlelight glanced off the silver locket on the table beside her bowl. Its reflection merged with the quiet rhythm of rain against the window. Days grew shorter again. One evening she walked to the ridge, taking the locket with her. The valley stretched calm below, houses glowing faint under thin smoke. Above her, the oak leaves rattled dryly in the cold wind. She laid the locket in a shallow hollow beside the roots and covered it with fallen leaves. Not hidden, not buried, simply placed back into the same world that had borne it. For a while she remained still, the last light turning the forest bronze. A thought passed, not mournful, but accepting. Everything returns, to soil, to silence, to memory. Even mistakes find their way to rest, if left unchained. When she walked home through fading light, her steps no longer echoed. The ground absorbed her passage with tender grace. In her cottage, she lit the fire and sat beside it, feeling its warmth rise, unhurried. Outside, the wind carried the scent of damp earth and distant rain. She closed her eyes. The candle trembled, the truffle's shadow rolled along the wall, and somewhere within that gentle flicker lay all that needed saying, that everything once lost may still find a keeper, and truths once unearthed no longer accuse, they simply breathe. Morning unfolded slowly, tinting the fog in soft honey tones. The fields below the cottage carried wisps of cloud that brushed the vines like sleeping breath. It was a gentle season, the kind that neither hurried nor demanded. The woman rose with the light, her hands remembering work before thought could form it. Outside, the soil breathed faintly in the chill, all scent and memory. Years had quieted her life into something smaller, but not lesser. The markets no longer knew her by name. Newer foragers had taken those paths, young and quick of step. She welcomed their curiosity, sometimes guiding them to where mushrooms grew dense beneath ash trees, or where truffles liked the richer loam. The forest, generous as ever, kept its secrets only to those who came without greed. Her days passed by clear routine, tending the small garden, mending baskets, drying herbs by the window. At times, she would sit near the hearth, half dozing, her mind wandering across years as though they were stitched together by smell. Oak bark, rain, the faint trace of Brina's hide. She never cried when the memories came. Age had taught her that tears add nothing to remembrance. Quiet does the work more honestly. The locket never returned to her hands. She left it in the woods and did not regret it. Its image lived vivid enough within her. The painted eyes of a woman wronged, yet serene at last. Perhaps someone would find it again one day, a child or a wanderer, and wonder at its meaning. Stories survive, not by possession, but by continuation.
That was lesson enough. Seasons followed each other with the patience of breath. In the 3rd year after the steward's death, vines yielded richly, and the hills filled with laughter come harvest. She stood at her door and watched the carts creak past, the barrels clinking like prayer bells. Villagers called greetings. She raised a hand in return, her smile small but true. The world had grown kinder around her, or perhaps she had simply ceased expecting its cruelty. Fear, when left unfed, withers like any living thing. Children now came to her for stories, half for company, half for sweets she sometimes baked when trade brought sugar. She told tales without beginning or end, of saints who spoke to animals, of trees that remembered voices, of lost things returning through dreams. They never knew these were fragments of her own life, disguised in folklore. Summer waned again, tilting toward harvest. The forest ripened with silence. She felt it pulling at her, that old rhythm. Some mornings found her walking the familiar paths with a stick in hand. The trail to the oak ridge had narrowed to a thread, overgrown but still recognizable. She moved slowly, the ground cushioned with leaves. When she reached the clearing where the rose bush once bloomed, she found its remains, thorns bare, stems gray with age, yet a single blossom persisted, white and faintly fragrant. She knelt there, not from piety but gratitude. Touching the soil, she felt its warmth despite the evening chill, and a memory surfaced unbidden. Father Roberto's quiet remark that the earth remembers kindness most. She wondered then if the soil also remembered forgiveness. The sky dimmed, orange melted into violet. She lingered until the first bats skimmed low for insects. When she rose, her knees ached pleasantly, the way old wood bends without breaking. Every breath carried both weight and peace, indistinguishable from one another. When she reached her cottage, lamps already flickered along the valley floor. The first stars had appeared, small as pinpricks through gauze. She set her walking stick by the door, stirred the coals, and brewed herself broth with rosemary. While it simmered, she opened the window. Cool air slipped in, threaded with distant smoke and the faint song of frogs. Later, she sat near the fire, cup between her palms, and listened to the night's gentle murmurs, the creak of wood, the sigh of wind along the chimney, the familiar cricket's chorus. Each sound seemed alive, connected to the pulse beneath the earth that had guided her since childhood. Somewhere, a memory laughed, and she smiled into the glow. The world outside might have forgotten her name, but not her work. The woods remained tended by quiet hands, and the valley's people still traded stories of a huntress who found silver where others saw only mud. Some tales inflated her courage, others softened her loneliness, but all agreed that she listened to the land better than most priests to their prayers. Sometimes she awoke before dawn and stepped outside, barefoot. The ground's chill bit at her toes, waking her fully. Overhead, the stars retreated slowly, while a faint pink began to gather on the horizon. In those hours, the valley belonged to memory alone, and even the sound of her breath seemed ancient. She thought of her parents, of Matteo, of Lucia. None judged her from the silence. All felt near, as if time had folded enough to make peace possible. The harvest festival came that year brighter than ever. Lanterns hung along the vineyard rows. Wine flowed freely between hands calloused but joyful. She stood at the edge, laughing quietly with others, remembering the friars' stories from her youth, and realizing how little the heart truly changes. The songs rose into night, mingling with the scent of crushed grapes and damp straw. When she returned home, moonlight spilled across the threshold. She placed a cluster of grapes upon the table as offering. To what, she could not say. Habit, perhaps, or gratitude. The fire had nearly died. She added one log, its crackle soft as an old friend speaking. Her gaze wandered to the shelf above the hearth. There, hanging by a thread of twine, the dried truffles still rested like a small black heart. She touched it lightly, smiling. "You've seen more than most of us," she murmured, amused at her own sentiment. The warmth of the fire brushed her face. Outside, an owl's call slid through the open window. Sleep claimed her gently that night. She dreamed of the forest not as it had been, but as something renewed, her footsteps young again, Brina trotting ahead, the air sharp with promise. She dreamed of digging in soft soil and finding not silver, not jewels, but roots swelling with light, small glowing bulbs that pulsed like living moons beneath the ground. She woke before dawn, heart steady, unafraid of the quiet that followed. The next morning came soft and clear. She watered her herbs, lit the fire anew, and baked coarse bread for the day. When she stepped outside, dew glistened on the grass like scattered glass. Far off, church bells drifted faintly through the valley, neither calling nor warning, just existing. She lifted her face to the light, feeling the warmth not as something given, but as something returned. In the hush that followed, she thought only this, that all things buried, whether sorrow or treasure, find their way back to the surface when the world is ready to see them. The soil, forgiving and exacting, keeps no grudges. Under its watch, truths decay into nourishment, and from them rise new roots, new beginnings. She smiled at the thought, turned toward the path leading to the forest, and began her walk, slow, sure, certain. Somewhere ahead, the woods waited as they always had, filled with secrets, work, and wonder. The day opened quietly around her, vast yet kind, carrying the scent of earth after rain and the long, steady promise of peace.